Now we're gonna start. Okay, this is a Redwood Coast Energy Authority meeting of July 27th, 2023. And Lori, I think you're going to read us some instructions.
Yes, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Board Clerk Lori Teketa speaking. Before Chair Sherry Wu calls this in-person and online hybrid meeting to order, here are some housekeeping announcements. For those of you here at Jefferson Community Center, the microphones will be on throughout the meeting and are very sensitive. Please do not mute them. And please do not speak while someone else has the floor. Online and phone participants cannot hear what is being said when people talk over each other. And when speaking, please identify yourself for the benefit of remote participants. Today, we do not have any online board members. However, there is the remote location where the public that is at the WHPEC office. For community members participating in the public comment periods, please use the podium if you are able to. And so the microphone picks up your voice. Online participants, click the raise hand button in the webinar controls. Phone participants, press *9 to raise your hand. Public comment may be limited to 3 minutes at the chair's discretion, and please raise your hand early so we don't miss prompting you for you to speak. And as a note, we tend not to go back and forth online or phone participants, so please get in your public comments early. Emailed public comments are accepted before and during the meeting at publiccomment@redwoodenergy.org. And finally, online participants, if you experience phone or internet disruptions during this meeting, please notify us if possible by calling or texting 707-382-7336. The number is on your screen, 707-382-7336, or by emailing publiccomment@redwoodenergy.org. We have no director participating remotely, so we don't have to do a roll call vote.
Great. Thank you, Lori. At this time, I'd like to move one item on the agenda because it's Stephen who's going to be giving us the item 8.1, the rural rent statewide rural and hard to reach energy efficiency program needs to leave for another meeting. So I'd like to move that to after the consent calendar. So move item 8.1 to right before item 5. And with that, reports from member entities.
May we do a roll call?
Oh, I thought you said we didn't need to.
No, roll call vote.
Oh, okay. Yeah, please do.
Director Bauer,
Here.
Director Bone,
Present.
Director Gagnon,
Present.
Director Jorgensen,
Here.
Director Mobley,
Here.
Director Sherry Provolt,
Present.
Director Scafani,
Here.
Vice Chair Schaefer,
Here.
Director Jack Tuttle is absent, Director Wilson,
Here.
and Chair Wu. There is a quorum.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lori. Okay, now reports from member entities. Anybody who'd like to make a report to the board? I'm not seeing anybody. Great, we'll move on to oral communications. This is the time for people to address the board or submit written communications on matters that are not on the agenda. And we can respond to these statements, but we cannot take action. So is there any oral communications from the public?
Nobody
Not-
online.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. So I'm going to close oral communications, move on to consent calendar. All matters on the consent calendar are considered to be routine by the board and are enacted in one motion, but we want to discuss something separately, we can by indicating that we'd like to pull that item. So we have item 4.1, approve minutes of the June 22nd, 2023 meeting. 4.2, approve disbursements report. 4.3, accept the financial reports. And 4.4, approve the rural rent portfolio manager job description. So is there anybody here that would like to pull any of these items? Not seeing any. And is there anybody from the public that wants to pull one of these items?
Nobody online.
All right, So I'd entertain a motion to approve everything on the consent.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Right? Oh, do we need, so how do you want to do this? Like,
You can do a voice vote, but if you don't mind also just doing a no vote and an abstain vote, so I can just catch.
gotcha. Are there any no votes? Any abstain votes?
I need to abstain because I wasn't at the June 22nd meeting.
Thank you, Janice. Yep. Okay. And if I do, remind me if I'm,
I'm not abstaining, but you don't. Your regular board member said everything was fine, so.
thank you, Rex. Cool, thanks. Okay, so that takes care of 4, that takes care of 5. So let us move on to item 8.1. This is Rural Rent Statewide Rural and Hard to Reach Energy Efficiency Program.
Don't have a presentation. Thank you, everyone. Those of you who were here last month, though, may recall that I did give a presentation on the Rural Regional Energy Network and the proposed decision to approve the motion that RCA submitted to be administrator of a network, working with rural regions throughout the state to administer energy efficiency programs through the CPUC. I'm very happy to report that proposed decision was finalized by the CPUC, and so that motion passed, and the rural REN standing for Regional Energy Network, was formed, which was very exciting. And at the end of that presentation, I also had a list of future items that would be coming as part of that. One of them passed in the consent calendar, which was a job description for a new position, a portfolio manager, to help administer the rural REN, because RCA, as well as using this opportunity to implement programs within Humboldt County, is also the administrator of this entire regional energy network, which comes with that 10% of the entire budget is allocated towards being the administrator, and the 4-year budget is approximately $84 million. So that's, a substantial amount of money that's coming to RCA to act as administrator. With the approval of the plan was some very tight deadlines on some administrative functions. The first being a true-up advice letter that will have to happen in October, followed shortly thereafter by joint cooperation memos, and not just one of them, but 3 of them, with pretty much every other administrator that overlaps any of the territory of the rural REN. So we'll be negotiating with all 3 investor-owned utilities within the state, plus existing RENs and other CCAs, to make sure that there's no program overlap or duplication. In order to begin that work, RCA has had a longstanding contract with Frontier Energy, working with our existing energy efficiency programs. Under that contract, our energy efficiency support systems and support activities and ad hoc activities. And so what we would like to do is continue working with Frontier to help us hit those initial administrative functions, and then at a later date, probably next meeting, we'll be coming with some RFPs, including one for administrative functions for the rural REN into the implementation phase. So this item is to request a contract amendment with Frontier Energy Solutions, and it's basically to add a budget element of $150,000 to complete these tasks. Now, it's in the staff report. We are hoping that these funds will be reimbursable through our 2024 budget with the rural REN, but we have not had confirmation of that at this time. So either way, though, these are in order to achieve the continuing steps that we need to do to get running with the REN and start accessing these funds and these programs for both our county and the 31 counties throughout the state. We need to hit these regulatory milestones. And so we really need to have this support on board. We've worked very successfully with Frontier in the past. They've actually pretty regularly, which is not always the case with consultants, underbilled and overachieved. So we're very happy with them. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions from up here? Okay, then I will go ahead and take it out to the public. Nothing? So, Stephen, am I right then that the staff recommendation is, oh, it's the same here, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right there.
yeah, okay. Mhm. So,
Great. I will make a motion to approve the contract amendment number 5 with Frontier Energy Incorporated.
I'll second.
okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any noes? Any abstains? Okay. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you bringing my item up too. Now, go back to the office before.
I know. Can't go to too many board meetings in a day.
Exactly.
Thank you, everybody. So let's see, that brings, so that was, hang on, 8.1, we did that. So moving on to CCE business and confirm that we have a quorum, we do. Business is item 6.1, solicitation for CPUC mandated 2023 midterm grid reliability requirements.
This is Richard and team, so.
Okie dokie.
Richard's advising me on where to sit, so I'll take his advice.
Clicker might struggle a little bit. but-
Okay, I'm fine standing. Actually, I can't. Sitting,
Yeah.
but my neck will probably be happy. Good afternoon, everyone. Jocelyn Gwynn. I am Senior Power Resources Manager at RCEA, and I'm here to ask you for approval for a solicitation to seek additional midterm reliability resources. I think this is like my 4th time giving the board this some iteration of this presentation, so I apologize for redundancy. There are some changes though in this this current iteration that we wanted to review. So earlier this year, the CPUC, the Public Utilities Commission, issued a supplemental midterm reliability decision. So that added procurement requirements onto that for new incremental resources that need to be brought online by 2027 and 2028. So this was in addition to the existing procurement order that we had from 2021 that had obligations from 2023 to 2026, a lot of years in there. But this is a chart of RCEA's procurement obligation under both of those decisions. And so you can see there, you know, we have capacity obligations in different quantities each year from now to 2028. And the total capacity being 53 megawatts of net qualifying capacity. So those are the units of resource adequacy, which are discounted from, you know, a power plant's nameplate capacity. Just keep that in mind. So it's the eventual, you know, capacity of these contracts will be higher than 53 megawatts, but that's the kind of incremental capacity obligation. And there are subcategories that need to be met within some of the years that I won't go into all the details of. I've talked about them in the past, but suffice to say that 8 megawatts of that 53 need to be from a facility that is eligible to replace the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant that is going offline in a few years. And that needs to be online by 2025. RCEA has not procured that resource. And so we are definitely keen on seeking that. But the last 2 solicitations we ran were focused on that particular category, and they yielded no successful offers, no successful contracts. So we're still seeking that. Our long lead time resource requirements that are due now by 2028. This most recent decision pushed out the requirement from 2026 to 2028. We have procured those through California Community Power. So I'll talk about, you'll see those contracts in the next slide, but the remainder, the 35 megawatts remaining, can just come from any generic resource adequacy resource. This is a chart that Richard originally drafted that is a depiction of all of our procurement efforts to date. So the top 4 contracts have resulted from 2 solicitations with California Community Power that I referred to. And then the bottom 4 solicitations, those bottom 4 yellow boxes, are RCEA's own procurement efforts, actually bottom 5 yellow boxes because of that last one. So as I mentioned, the last two solicitations in 22 and 23 yielded no contracts. But we do have several projects that are, so I guess I should have mentioned on the previous slide that 53 megawatts of incremental capacity, we've procured about half of that. And so we've been, conducting several of our own solicitations, and we're hoping that this most recent one will be able to finally conclude our midterm reliability procurement. We've also been conducting bilateral discussions with other CCAs, and one of those did yield a successful contract with Valley Clean Energy for some of their capacity from a solar plus storage project that is actually partially online and supposed to become fully online in the next few days. So we're really glad that they were willing to sell us capacity from that project because it's helping us meet the most near-term obligation, which we were having a really hard time filling. This is just some highlights of the solicitation. So we are seeking renewable, carbon-free, aka large hydro, or energy storage projects that can be operational by summer of 2025 through 2027. And all the documents, so you have the solicitation protocol in your packet. All the other supplemental documents, as well as the terms and conditions of this RFO, are substantially the same as the February RFO that the board approved. However, there are a few key changes. So one being that we made a few changes to allow offers that are not just meeting that Diablo Canyon replacement requirement, but can meet just the generic RA obligation. Made some changes just to the COD, like the commercial operation date eligibility requirement and details like that, just to allow those offers to submit. And then another key change is we've adjusted the evaluation structure. So we're proposing sort of a atypical structure. Instead of having kind of a short window where we're accepting offers and then we review all of them at once at the end, we're proposing to have this RFO open for a longer period so that, and having kind of a schedule of review dates that staff can review batches of offers received and engage with the ad hoc committee to hopefully approve shortlisting those offers and enable us to move quicker. It's been a very dynamic market, and we've actually lost viable offers because we haven't been able to move quickly enough on them. Yeah. And so this would be sort of roughly on a 2-week basis, but maybe, a different schedule depending on what offers we receive and when, sort of like a position open until filled kind of hiring process. That's what we envision for this. And so we're proposing that the solicitation be open for 2 years, or unless if RCEA fills its midterm reliability obligation sooner, then we would close that sooner than that. This is the same as the February RFO as well, but I just wanted to highlight that we are asking the board to create an ad hoc offer review committee so that staff can engage with that committee over this period to review and shortlist offers and to approve any changes to the offers once we're in negotiations, because we have seen that reprice requests, schedule changes come up while we're negotiating with counterparties. And instead of bringing that to the whole board and kind of stalling out negotiations, it'd be really helpful to be able to engage with the ad hoc committee on that. But final contracts, as with all RCA contracts, would come to the full board for approval. And that is it for me.
All right, thank you, Jocelyn. Any questions for Jocelyn from the board?
Overseas call.
I do have a question about
Go ahead.
Diablo. I thought they're going to extend the contract to keep it alive, right? But for how long? That's just until that date.
So my understanding is the CPUC obligation to bring this capacity online is still there regardless of when Diablo is actually going to be extended to. So yeah, there's been no indication from the CPUC that they're willing to kind of dial back these aggressive procurement orders because of that. Just because I think from their perspective, they would rather the capacity come online before Diablo is retired. So even if it's pushed out 1-2 years, they still want that capacity online to avoid reliability issues.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Does Diablo have a drop dead date?
I think what
I mean, it already had one.
it was originally going to be building the 2 units, one in 2024 and the other in 2025. The new decision, I believe, says that they can stay open until as late as 2030. But if enough capacity is brought online soon enough to still have the reliability and be able to close it down, then it could close sooner than that. What I'm hearing is people are generally assuming it is going to stay all the way till 2030.
It is. They're spending money like they're going longer than that. And we gave them $150 million too, right? Wasn't it the state to stay open? So it's a good deal if you can find it.
Regulatory,
Cleanest power in the world.
maybe she could fill us in on that, but I haven't been following that proceeding closely.
All right, so any other comments from the board? Okay, I'll take, go ahead, Jen.
Sorry, just one comment, the RFO text in the first paragraph. Will you just add the Yurok tribe and the Blue Lake Rancho Villa tribe
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah.
members? Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Thanks.
That's
Okay.
my oversight.
And this is Director Gagnon. I had just one question about the deposit. So I guess that the deposit is there in case they're not able to fulfill commitments. Is the amount of the deposit pretty standard across agreements like these?
Yeah, we've sort of settled on that as a standard amounts, but we can change it as directed, but
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else from up here? All right, I'll take it out to the public. We're on item 6.1.
No comments.
All right, so we have some staff recommendations and I'll entertain a motion for these, and then after that, we could talk about the ad hoc board committee.
Motion
I'll
to.
move to approve staff recommendation.
Okay, so this is authorize staff to issue the 2023 midterm reliability request, establish an ad hoc board, offer review committee, authorize staff to engage with shortlisted respondents, et cetera, right? Okay, did you second? Okay. Got that, Lori? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any noes? Any abstains? Nope.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. So let's go back to establish an ad hoc board offer review committee. So how many folks do we need on this committee?
I think
Staff.
be as little as 2, and maybe Lori can advise us on.
You can go up to your one less than a quorum.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't think we're going to be beating.
So I.
I'm worried about that.
Now, get there.
I think there were three for the last solicitation, and we will try our very best to keep the time requirement down.
Yeah.
Like probably, 1 hour meetings like every month or so.
But you could go up to 5.
Gotcha. So does anybody want to be on this?
I gotta say, it's interesting to me. I'm willing to volunteer.
I will. That's 2. Anybody else? Oh, come
Oh,
on.
okay. There's already 2 of you, so if
That's
I might
true.
not be able to make it, you'll still be fine.
Yeah, and the same goes.
Yeah.
For the,
So just,
okay.
just so if there is somebody that can't make it, it makes sense to have at least
Excuse me,
enough.
Chair. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
May I clarify with legal counsel? This is a CCE business item. Is there any requirement
Oh, right. I can't.
voting CCE members or no?
I would suggest this be only the CCE.
I have to do it.
You're on it.
The full contract will come back to the entire board because
But even then, I don't vote on it.
the RCEA risk, yeah.
Okay.
But you could act in an advisory role. I don't know.
All right. Elise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes care of 1. We're moving on to old CCE, that's the Energy Risk Management Quarterly Report.
Hello, everyone. Jacqueline Hart from the Energy Authority here to give the quarterly report. Second time I've come up here in a, relatively kind of time, and the weather is great outside, so I think I should just come up here every month and give a quarterly report. There's unfortunately some law of red text up there on the report, so maybe you don't want to see me up here every month. So just to give an overview of kind of the big drivers, the big change that we've seen in the rates and load forecast is coming from the rate side. So it's impacting RCA's expected revenue. And this is one where it's, a positive for your ratepayers as well as all of PG&E ratepayers, but increase in RCA expected revenues. So for 2024 and 2025, we now have an expectation of PG&E rates going down from where they currently are. And given that RCA bases its rates as a discount to PG&E rates, that would bring RCA's rates down absent any board action. And so this would result in a decrease of expected revenues of 9.5 million in 2024 and just a little less than that in 2025. As many of you are aware, having seen me do this song and dance multiple times up here, this is our current best forecast. A lot of year before we finalize rates for 2024 and a lot of things that could change in the power market. But at this moment, this is the best forecast we have. On the net power cost side, the first item there is the big one, and that is a change in the expectation of Sandrini's COD date. I believe when I was last here, we were shifting it out of starting in 2023 to starting in Q2 of 2024. We've now received updates from the developer that suggests the sort of safe date to assume for the project going commercial is the very end of 2024/beginning of 2025. 12/31/24 is the current model expected COD. And that has a big impact on RCA's expected net revenues for 2024 because that project came in at, still has a relatively good PPA price, and the cost of replacement product for that resource is high. And the next slide has a little bit more of a breakdown on that, but the punchline is 17.5 million of losses of value that the RCA would have received in that project. One little spot of positive news, and this is sort of related to the rates piece, is that energy prices overall in the California market are down from where they were when I was last here in April. So that impact is positive for, impacting not just 2024 and future years, but even this year. So that's, one positive thing, and that's what's causing rates to likely go down as well. They move. And then while energy prices overall are down, sort of everything else product wise in the energy markets in California is up. And so this is mainly capacity prices as well as the environmental products, carbon, renewables. And this primary driver for all three of those shifting is due to reduced expectations of new power plants coming online over the next few years. So there's a squeeze that RCA is experiencing with Sandrini. A lot of other load serving entities are experiencing with their own resources that they're trying to get built out. And so then everyone is less scrambling for environmental product and RA as well. And so that impacts RCA's net power costs. So digging into the Sandrini delay impact in a little bit more detail, this is just a breakdown of the value that was expected in Q2 through Q4 of 2024, where we no longer expect that project to generate. The one little green bit is a reduction in PPA costs. Since the plant isn't online and generating, you aren't paying the developer for that. So that's $5.5 million that you aren't spending. But in return, you aren't getting the energy from the resource, the RA capacity value that you need from the resource, the renewable PC1 procurement that would go towards meeting RCA's internal goals. You're actually going to go a little bit above your internal goals for 2024 with what Sandrini would have been delivering in 2024. So in order to so you've locked out on the 2.1 million of potential revenue that you've gotten from selling your long position in order to backfill what is lost from Sandrini in order to meet your internal targets. You'll need to spend 6.3 million for renewable PCC1s and then a little bit additional for carbon free. So that's a cheaper product than trying to buy all of the PCC1s that Sandrini would have delivered. Carbon free is priced cheaper than PCC1. And so just as a reminder, this is based on RCA's internal goals set by the board, not compliance requirements. Your compliance requirements for the remainder of the compliance period are lower. So, when I was here last time, we were talking about where you want to set the targets for 23 and future years. There is opportunity to potentially go down in those targets to reduce the expected energy costs for 24. So that's kind of the big unfortunate news with Sandrini. The other thing I'll just note is that this is lost value, as I say, like this is what you would have received in value. We may not be able to find the RA that is needed for 24. It's a very tight market. That's why prices are so high. It's because the supply is non-existent. So, there's that question. Same sort of question with the renewable PCC1 procurement and the carbon-free procurement. While California did have a really great water year, the Pacific Northwest didn't. So finding carbon-free resources is really hard to do. Finding PCC1 renewable resources is really hard to do on the short-term market. So it's unfortunate place that RCA is in, and you're sharing a fate with a lot of other load serving entities. This slide is just meant to show kind of, give you a picture of how big Sandrini's impact is to RCA's portfolio, because I think it's easy to get lost in the numbers of, well, how big is this project actually? It's large. It's going to be serving about a third of your energy needs, and also your for 100% renewables, third of your renewable needs for the 15 years of the PPA. So while it's very sad to see just the blue bar in 2024 now of RCA's load forecast without Sandrini sharing a proportion of it, I do think it's important just to note with the board that
the project overall in the long run is a winner. The average value over the lifetime of the PPA is about 19 million above what you would be doing if you were trying to buy something else in the short-term market. So it's still a very valuable part of your portfolio, and that's why it hurts so much that it's moved out of 2024 COD. And then another thing I'll note, and maybe pass it over to staff if they want to expand more, is that myself and a colleague of mine, Alex Wong, who just focused on renewable and storage development in the US, both of us at TEA, met with RCA staff and the developers of Sandrini EVPR today to have a discussion about, well, how certain are you on this the COD and what kind of contingencies do we have? So I don't know, Richard, do you want to expand on that at all, or?
They drove up from San Francisco specifically to have this one brief meeting with us. So I think that signals that they're serious about wanting to work something out with us. And we've kind of had some initial negotiations on how we might accommodate this.
Hey, Richard, could you, does he need to talk at the mic?
That would be helpful if you don't.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, we just kind of initiated the conversation with them about under which terms we might be willing to amend the agreement to accommodate this increased delay in the project and mitigating harm to RCEA financially, and in terms of compliance as well in the process.
What seems to be holding the thing up?
Specifically, it's there's this Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act, which has made it very difficult to import solar panels from China. And they've been sourcing their panels from China. They claim they have all of the documentation necessary to show that these panels are compliant. However, the Customs and Border Protection found otherwise, and looks like they're not going to be letting the first round of panels in or the second round of panels. They are currently working on sourcing panels from non-China sources and expect to be able to get the project built with these panels that shouldn't have any problems with compliance with the Forced Labor Protection Act.
Which, as I know, Matthew always likes to point out, of course, we want to comply with that act. We don't want to have panels that came from forced labor. It's just tricky to navigate the red tape around this because panels were already under construction before this regulation was rolled out. And so proving the counterfactual after you've already made the panels. Any other questions on Sandrini from the board?
I saw, Janet, did you?
That's my question.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
I do have a question. I mean, do we trust them? Are they going to deliver? I'm frustrated. I mean, it seems like we've been talking about it for a while now. I know there's no other options though, but that a breach of contract when you can't, and it's, 2 years out, it's kind of ridiculous. And it's not our fault. I mean, it's 100% Sandrini, but what are we going to do?
There may be other options, but to the extent that we've discovered so far, none of them look more attractive. Sticking with this, I do think that my sense, and I'm hearing this from TEA staff and debriefing with them after the meeting today, is we do think they're working with us in good faith. The fear that we've had in pushing back too hard on, their previous price increase that they asked us for a couple of years ago, and the negotiations we're having with them now is that there is a scenario where they could just say, fine, we'll just terminate the contract, pay the damages, walk away and resell the project to somebody else at a higher price. And we recognize that that's a risk. And it wouldn't be a good outcome for RCEA to have that happen. So to some extent, we feel obligated to engage with them and work to find a solution. But we do feel like they could have already done that and just, it would have probably been to their financial benefit to do so. So I think we're sort of banking on their care for their own reputation, not wanting to be known in the industry as doing that. Probably the main thing protecting us from that scenario now. So we feel we want to and need to work with them, but we just kind of need to find that sweet spot where we're protecting our own interests.
And, you know, the fear is not unfounded in the sense that because the market prices, and it's become very much a seller's market, have gone up so much, you know, other CCAs have seen developers basically say, oh, well, we'll pay the $6 million in damages to breach the contract because we can make, you know, $20 million more over the life of the project by like remarketing it in the current. So people are, you know, sort of making the call to just say, hey, I'll just pay the damages to breach the contract and then, you know, make more money. And so, you know, we did a back of the envelope calculation of if they did this, you know, it'd probably be financially viable for them to do that. So, you know, I don't think we want to sort of call their bluff. And conversely, then if we went to replace this, we would be doing it in the current market. And so they would, you know, we would be paying more if we went out and said, all right, we want to do a different solar project today, you know, and another developer came, you know, we're I think highly unlikely to get the same price that we have for this contract. And so again, that's where I think this graph is sort of, you know, it's frustrating to have these delays and, you know, and we're not alone as far as all the supply chain issues, but, you know, the big negative number for like bumping it out another year that's in that far left column, it's like, well, if you think about, you know, all right, we moved it one notch that way, and that's how much it cost us. If we took it away, it's like, well, all right, year after year after year, we're losing that same, you know, benefit. So, and if we went out to do a new project, it's like, well, they're not going to say, oh, we've got a solar project in California that's going to be online next year. So, you know, it's as annoying as it is, it's like in sort of a dispassionate way. It's still like, well, any other option is worse for us and more expensive for us than, you know, and again, I think the positive part is, you know, they come up here to talk about this. They're trying to make it work. You know, they're working with now 3 different suppliers to try to get alternative panels. And, you know, they're sitting there with a solar array that's like built except for the panels. So like, you know, it's a bunch of racking sitting out of the ground. And that's one of the things they brought up as a challenge is because before the law changed, you know, they had designed the system, they had bought all the racking and it was around a certain panel. So it's not like any panel can just swap in and, you know, so they have to find a compatible panel because they already built the rest of the array except for the panels. So.
Gotcha.
And I would just note that they're being much more upfront and straightforward and you know, essentially telling it like it is than the vast majority of developers that we're working with. So the attitude is good, the vibe is good, the numbers are bad. So. All right. Moving on, so kind of moving into the standard slides that you see from me every quarter. Here's the change in the forecasted rates. So there's the PG&E generation rate shown by the blue bar. Solid is the current forecast, dashed is what I was showing you back in April. And then the red is the PCIA. Solid again is the most current forecast, and the dash is what I was showing you back in April. You know, the main thing to note here is that, you know, essentially RCA's revenues are the blue line minus the red line. So if the blue line goes down, it means less revenues. If the red line goes up, it means less revenues. Both of those tend to unfortunately squeeze together or come apart together. So it's kind of a bit of a feast or famine just based on how the rate structure is set up. And we're moving into a slightly reduced rate than what we. So great for everyone's personal pocketbook, a little unfortunate for RCA's expected revenues. And then, but you know, moving in concert with that is the energy prices. So the blue bar is the on-peak energy prices, that's daytime hours during the weekdays and Saturday. The orange bar is off-peak prices, that's prices in the middle of the night and on Sundays and holidays. And dashed are what you saw back in April. Solid is most current. You can see that you know, there has been a substantial downtick of prices, so that's a positive for RCA's expected net power costs. And bringing those two together, we get to kind of the punchline, what RCA's annual net revenue forecast is moving forward. So 2023, actually a little bit of positive news. We're up 1.5 million from where we were expecting back in April. So you will be putting a comfortable net revenues into your reserves at the end of this year. But as you can see, 2024 has really flipped. This is primarily due to Sandrini, also partially due to those rates. And so that's meaning that you will be eating into your reserves next year if everything goes as forecast. And then in 2025, the main driver of that change is the decrease in expected rates with some slight impacts from power costs moving back and forth. So if we look at the cash projection, first here's sort of the historical going back to 2019 through Q2 of 2025, the blue bar being where we are right now. So we've been steadily growing. We expect to steadily grow through the end of 2023. The big dip that you see in early 2024 is when all of your environmental product bills come due. They actually might come due earlier, but we don't know exactly when we'll receive the invoice from the entities that we purchased the environmental products from. So we'll always just peg it a couple months after the turn of the year. So that's the big jump down. And then in 2025, the same thing occurs. And I'll just note that in 2025, it's a bigger jump because that's all that replacement of Sandrini at the elevated prices that we're seeing for 24 environmental products. And so then we get to the cash projection, blue being what you saw in April and orange today. So unfortunately, not that healthy growing bar that we were hoping to see and that we saw last time I was up here. But, over the course of the period that we're looking at, there are some dips, but we still stay with a relatively healthy reserve margin for the time being. And should Sandrini come online as expected at the beginning of 2025, we would expect to see that grow through 2025 as it provides energy and environmental attributes, especially over this time period.
And to kind of just go back to that, like delays being frustrating, but the ultimate, duration of, over the next decade plus, it's like the trajectory after it comes online is the same. And so while it would be nice if that orange line was going up, back where it was, it still ultimately, is the right direction we want it to go. And again, it's not like a 1 year thing. It's a 15-year track. So
that's my last slide. So I'll take any other questions from the board.
Any questions? Well, not the greatest news, but you try to keep our spirits up. And then I'll go out to the public if there's any public comment on where we at? Item 7.1.
No comment.
So this is just accept the quarterly energy risk management report. We don't need a motion or anything, right? We just accept it. Do we need a motion?
that's fine. Motion.
All right. So next up is item 7.2, annual report on Humboldt Sawmill MOU, information only.
From speaking to the board before, I kind of prefer the feng shui of sitting back here at this end of the room. I can look at the screen and talk to you at the same time. Does anybody object to that? Thank you.
As long as they can hear you on the mic.
Good afternoon. I'm Richard Engel, Director of Power Resources. I have a couple of consecutive items to report on today. First of them is our annual report on Humboldt Sawmill Company, our memorandum of understanding that we've had in place with them. This is our second round of reporting to the board on this. So I'm just going to cover, for those of you that are newer to the board, a little bit of background on this memorandum of understanding we have with Humboldt Sawmill Company. I'll talk about some process changes that we've implemented this year relative to how we did things last year. I'm going to give a summary of findings from the reporting that we got from HSC this year. I'm going to go over comments that we got from our newly formed Biomass Technical Advisory Group members. We'll talk about some alternative biomass use opportunities that seem to be emerging. Also, we'll talk about a proposal for a kind of citizen science air quality monitoring project that could have some relevance to our biomass procurement.
I'll talk about the discussion we had earlier this month with our community advisory committee about this, and then some lessons learned and next steps. When the board authorized extending our power purchase agreement with Humboldt Sawmill Company back in 2021, so it now goes out to 2031. The board asked the staff to periodically review the contract and look for alternate biomass uses and other environmental considerations. In order to do that, we negotiated a memorandum of understanding with Humboldt Sawmill Company, which the board adopted in September of that year. This MOU calls for HSC to provide operational data on the feedstock, plant performance, and emissions. It also calls for us to have an annual meeting between our staff and theirs to discuss the terms of the PPA and continued viability of biomass power in light of other opportunities they might have for feedstock use. So this year, relative to how we did it last year we just got the report from HSC. Staff looked it over, wrote up a staff report and presented that to the board. We got some feedback that it would be useful to get this new biomass technical advisory group formed in time for them to review the report and also to let our community advisory committee have a look at it before it comes to the board. So we made those extra steps this year, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. So now I'm going to just present a few slides that present in graphical form the data that we got from HSC. And this is now 2 years worth of data. So it's got the 2 years of reporting they've done so far combined into single graphs. Sorry that some of the text is kind of small here. What you see, there's some rises and falls here and some explanations for that. In 2021, they had to curtail the plant for some extended times while Humboldt Bay Power Plant was islanding during PSPS type events. And more recently, at the end of this last calendar year, they had to deal with a combination of the earthquake doing some damage to the plant and taking it off for repairs, as well as just some high fuel moisture levels from that extraordinarily wet winter that had to curtail things for a while. So you can just see that overall throughput was down at those times. And they also have taken the project offline for some capital projects back in 2022, the sawmill that is. So they had to source some material from outside. So the orange area on this is just material that was sourced from outside of Humboldt County, and the blue stuff is what they got locally. We think this is worthwhile to track because some of the critical comments that we've had about our biomass procurement is this really helping to solve a Humboldt County problem, or are we just taking biomass from wherever? In terms of supplier origin, we're also interested to know how much of this is coming from HSC or HRC's and Mendocino Redwood Company's own operations versus stuff that they're sourcing externally. So you can see, at all times that the majority of their material has been internally sourced, but when the Fairhaven plant shut down, they did for a while take a lot of material that was stocked at Fairhaven and use that to operate the plant. So there have been things like that have caused spikes in outside material being used. In terms of species, it's always been majority redwood, as you would expect. There was in the most recent year some other softwoods, dug fir and hemlock and other materials that were used in the plant, but still mostly redwood. As far as where they're getting it, timberlands and sawmill make up 95% of it. They occasionally do some things like get, almond hulls from the Central Valley or, stuff from PG&E line clearing, things like this that provide some of their feedstock. And I'll just preview one comment that we heard from a few people in reviewing this material was that in the future, they'd like to see the timberlands and sawmill broken out separately, which is a reasonable thing to want to see. In terms of in fuel value, millions of BTUs, they do use some diesel fuel at the plant. This is usually just used for starting up and warming up equipment after shutdowns and kind of incidental use like that. And in both years, that was well under 1% of their total fuel use. So biomass does make up the overwhelming majority of what gets burned at the plant. In terms of who gets the power, RCEA in both years here got 69% of the total generated power, with the rest of it being used on site for sawmill and other uses within HSC's own campus. And this just kind of gives a proportional sense. This is, the vertical scale here is millions of BTUs. So that's a common energy unit. And you can look at biomass fuel and diesel fuel and electricity output and just kind of get a sense of how those scale relative to each other. The diesel use, as you saw in the other graph, is pretty microscopic. So the orange part doesn't even really show up here. And you can see that again, the biomass fuel makes up the great majority of fuel used, and the electric generation is split between mostly being sold to RCA and some of it being used on site. This just gives you a sense of how that tracks month by month. And there's not really like a decisive seasonal swing in that. Relating how much they generate to how much emissions they put out, it's a pretty constant relationship. So the line up on the top there is how many megawatt hours of generation they put out each year, and the blue and orange bars there are the biomass derived and diesel derived emissions, and so they kind of rise and fall in concert with how much the plant is generating. So going on to comments, our biomass technical advisory group, the individual members provided comments. So we got some from Roberto Beltran from from Klamath National Forest, Kevin Fingerman, who's a professor at Cal Poly Humboldt who studies biomass and its impacts. We had 3 different environmental groups, North Coast Environmental Center, EPIC, and 350 Humboldt, all band together and provide joint comments. And then Jason Davis from the Air Quality District and Clark Stevenson, who works for the Watershed Research and Training Center. I didn't put all these comments into your board packet just for bulk, but I did put in a link to the CAC meeting packet that did have all of these comments in it. The last 2 comments there just were an oversight. Those didn't make it into the CAC packet. So I've just captured those in these next couple of slides. Jason Davis from the Air Quality District was basically noting that the materials supplied by HSC align with what HSC provides to the Air District. And he said that there was some compliance testing that showed them out of compliance in the materials they provided us. And he says that they did later come into compliance and that that's documented in materials that were still pending final completion at the time that HSC reported to us. Clark Stevenson had a set of questions about whether there were lower emission limit goals that we're striving for, were there substitute energy sources that we would use, are they using best available control technologies, just looking at alternative uses, including high hazard zone feedstocks. And he also asked about, are we looking at alternative biomass uses? I had some correspondence with Clark and got back to him on some of these questions that he put forth. So on the subject of alternative biomass uses, we don't have any written documentation of this so far, but in meeting with HSC in June, they let us know that they got a CAL FIRE grant and they used it to hire a consultant to look at alternative uses of biomass feedstock from their combined Humboldt and Mendocino operations. The study results identified some different alternative uses. Making hydrogen stood out as the leading opportunity. HSC does consider the study confidential at this time, so they've not shared a copy of it with us, but they seem very interested in continuing to talk with us and other possible interested groups in moving forward with some kind of alternative biomass uses. So they seem like they're really motivated on this. Sorry, I skipped a slide here. Oops, backpedal. So one other idea that originated with Matthew and kind of got reinforced by the SAFE symposium that happened a few months ago at the Blue Lake Rancheria was this idea of doing kind of a citizen science air quality monitoring project. The idea would be to deploy monitoring devices, perhaps with member agencies hosting them. So having them at various locations around the county to kind of establish what background levels of pollutants of concern look like. And then also having some monitoring near to HSC to kind of look and see how that differs, if it does, from just regional background levels. And Schatz Energy Research Center and the Karuk tribe did a similar study to this. They were more looking at the air quality impacts from wildfires and from cultural burning practices. But sort of the same techniques could be used. And we met with Schatz staff to talk about how they did their study. We've also talked with the Air Quality District, and they have access to getting these devices and support in using them through the Air Resources Board. So we're interested in moving forward on this if it helps us better understand air quality impacts of biomass being in our portfolio. In talking with the Community Advisory Committee, some of the key comments that we heard from them was they would like to see more time granularity on the emissions data. Currently, HSC is only just giving us annual totals. They are disclosing a lot of different pollutants, but just an annual total for each. They wanted to see more of the data graphed up rather than just raw data. They wanted to see the emissions data compared against air quality standards so they can understand where HSC is in or out of compliance. They were hoping to have the Air District staff explain deviations from compliance that are seen in the reporting. And they wanted to learn more about how local, state, and federal regulators respond, or at least should respond, when there are air quality violations. Beyond just these sort of comments on the reporting materials from HSC, some of the CAC members just really got into questioning the appropriateness of RCA procuring biomass power, just in light of pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions. And we heard additional comments from the public on the CAC meeting. As far as lessons learned for the next reporting cycle, we want to keep improving our process on this year over year. We're looking at providing the Biomass Technical Advisory Group with more contextual information so that they get more than raw data that's just passed through from HSC. So staff will put more effort into that. We're going to schedule more time into the whole process to give adequate time for the Biomass Advisory Group and the CAC to review HSC's report. And we'll push HSC to be more timely on getting the reporting to us. They're supposed to get it to us on or about May 1st for the MOU, and they were a bit late this year, and that kind of compressed the timeline for us. We might also propose coming to the board a bit later in the year to give adequate time for all these steps. We'll also probably start convening in-person or hybrid meetings of the biomass group to discuss the report. And we've also had a recommendation to consolidate their comments into a single report for the VTAG to sign off on rather than just passing through individual member comments. So next steps, happy to take any feedback from you and incorporate that in our reporting process back to HSC so that they hear back from you and incorporate those lessons learned that I just listed into scheduling and carrying out our reporting next year. One other thing that we've talked about is maybe Matthew has suggested, because we have the other project I'm about to talk about, Humboldt's Electric Future, which is aligned with the biennial integrated resource plan, that it might make more sense to kind of turn this into a process where we have more detailed reporting and interaction with HSC on those odd numbered years in between the IRPs, so that we can kind of use that to kind of make our HEF, the Humboldt's Electric Future project, more robustly informed on biomass. So we might have sort of a big year and a small year kind of alternating in terms of how detailed of reporting we do on this process. Happy to take any questions or comments. Thank you.
I think, Richard, a comparison of natural gas electricity generation versus biomass, and not just CO2 emissions, but we're talking about transporting natural gas to a facility here to generate power versus bringing local biomass and generating power that way. It seems like the public they're concerned probably about, well, CO2, of course, but mercury emissions and all that, other potential impacts to air quality. But I feel like we need to see a comparison, maybe that, when we mine natural gas in Wyoming and we ship it to California and then we burn it, there's actually a lot more CO2 involved in that process than simply trucking 10 miles of, dirt roads, wood to the plant and burning it. So something like that would be really informative and maybe help alleviate concerns that people have. I mean, we all want to go just, go solar, hydro and do that, but reality is something way different that people don't grasp in the community. And it'd be helpful to give them as much information as possible when it comes to that kind of comparison. I'm curious because I don't know either. I'm like, is it less CO2? And, when you consider trucking and it's really interesting.
And I would just say that I agree with Scott there, and that kind of from the comments that I've heard from the public and what was in the CAC packet and stuff, that especially these members of this advisory group kind of want more time with this data and to be able to compare more data points and look, are air quality violations taking place? That just, they need a little more time to kind of mull over and make proper, informed decisions and kind of even recommendations to us. Because if there are, serious air quality violations taking place, I think that's, something that we should know and be able to, look at this contract and evaluate, is this right for our CEA to be purchasing? Yes, it is a local resource. Yes, it is renewable, but it is not, necessarily carbon free. And so just to have kind of more time, to hear from these like main, big environmental groups of Epic and Community Humboldt that are kind of, saying in our face, it looks like there might be some issues here. I would like to, give those groups and that technical advisory group a little more time to mull over some of that data and give, a more informed recommendation to the CAC and by proxy to us about, kind of what to do about possible violations that could be going on. So. Go ahead, Frank.
The other thing to add into that, adding information is what happens if you're not running it into the biomass Scotia plant. If you're going to create, and they can be, I don't know the numbers of the amount of trucks, but it can be 50 to plus truckloads a day. And what they've done there is they've moved the biomass comes from the mill directly into the power plant. About 5 years ago, they used to put it all in trucks. If they wanted to move it to the power plant, they put it into chip bins and trucked it up to the power plant, which is only, say, a half mile away, but they had to do that. It now goes directly in there and there is no diesel fuel emissions when they move that fuel. If the plant wasn't running, then you would have to move that fuel. The alternatives would be one, to shut the plant down, which I don't think Humboldt Redwood is going to lead to shut down their sawmill. Two, they could take it to a landfill somewhere, which isn't landfills aren't accepting the amount of mass that you would have. They would most likely put it into trucks and truck it over to Anderson or somewhere in that vicinity where there's another biomass plant. So at that time, you again incur quite a bit of diesel emissions to do that. So if they're going to do this study where they're going to say, what's going to happen to us with the CO2, they also have to say, what is the alternative if we don't do this? And so my pet peeve in this whole energy thing is lots of people have lots of ideas, but the practicability of having just what we say, we want to have 100% biomass or 100% renewable in Humboldt County. When we define what renewable is, it has to be within the constraints of Humboldt County. And where you're going to get 100 megawatts of power that is actually produced within Humboldt County, outside of the fact you get offshore wind and bring onshore wind to the county from when they bring it from the offshore wind, that it gets into Humboldt County and is distributed from Humboldt County and not somewhere below it. So you have the ideas of where you want to go, and you also have the reality that you want those lights on while we're talking. And so those numbers need to be factored into any studies that the CAC or the other organizations request. That information has to come in. And then my other question was, who pays for those studies? Is that something RCA is going to have to pay for? Or is there a grant, or is there the state that's going to pay for those studies to be done?
Well, and I'll ask a question off that, because I mean, wasn't part of this that they were going to explore some of these alternative uses, but I recall the staff report saying that they've kept those kind of under wraps. And why is it secret? Why is it, I mean, that's or they don't want the ideas out yet, or what? I mean, do you know any extra information about that?
They talked with us about it in the meeting. And like I say, they consider the report proprietary and didn't want to disclose it to us at this time, but they did talk to us about it. And then Matthew and I participated in a more recent call with them to learn a little bit more. They seem very interested in doing something with this. I mean, if you look at biomass plants in Humboldt County, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there were 3 operating plants. Now we're down to 1, and they were all built around the same time. HSC is a senior citizen as power plants go. And I think that HSC probably realizes that that plant's not going to be online too much longer. And I think they're just starting to look at the long game of how are they going to keep handling this big biomass stream when it might not be cost effective to turn it into electric power anymore.
You mentioned up here that hydrogen was on there as a viable use. And did they give much of a discussion on that?
They did in the more recent meeting that we had with them. They talked about, possible volumes that they could produce across their whole industry operation in Mendocino and Humboldt. They disclosed some volume that sounds really significant. Just for kicks, we kind of compared that against how much hydrogen HTA would use for its bus fleet. And it looks like they could potentially produce far in excess of what HTA is going to need. I think fuel quality might be a challenge for that application, though. I think Jan is nodding her head because we know some history of how tricky it is to turn biomass into fuel that's of the quality for the kind of fuel cells that are used on buses. But there are probably some other opportunities out there for hydrogen.
Thank you.
And we're asking a lot of stuff from HSC, but all of the stuff we're asking for is readily available from air quality. They have to put it into air quality on a daily basis. I mean, their input is quite daily. So we're kind of asking for something really redundant and then putting the burden on a private enterprise when air quality has all this information. They can tell you every day it's been violated. They've broken down, and I've been on air quality for 10 years. We had one settlement, which they bought wood stoves with, which I love. It was 5,000 wood stoves for the violation. But besides that, they have been pretty good players. And I sat on this meeting in 21 when everybody was, and argued these same points of they are meeting air quality standards they would be shut down if they were exceeding serious violations or anything like that. Now we talk about other uses. I mean, we've heard about hydrogen and hydrogen's not easy. I was just down at the hydrogen plant before I got kicked off HTA too. But looking into that, it's all going to take a little bit of work. But at the end, the largest sawmill operator, second largest sawmill operator in the United States, has just built 2 brand new biomass plants. Our own Frank Schmidbauer just bought one of the other ones over in Reading. It seems to me these guys that have been in the business for decades, and if there was another resource that could take the place and be cost effective, Red's got he's got a division that just makes playground chips. Mm-hmm. That's all they do is make playground chips. They've got another division that just makes decorative chips. But the market's running, it's overflooded because right now, why don't you ask about half the state, what people tell you if you want to use wood chips in your flower gardens around your house. That's not a defensible space item. That has completely dropped their market almost 50%. So as we do this, they're not hiding anything in the report. They told you hydrogen. Hydrogen is 90% of what they were told they could do with it. And then they threw out little tidbits and everything else. But the problem is to take them to a manufacturing facility that's anywhere close, or actually on to put them on rail to actually save money. We don't have that availability. So if we're going to run them to Sacramento or anything like that, we're going to put a diesel truck on the road weighing 80,000 pounds running through the lakes. And in the long run, we have to balance everything on what is happening for what it's doing to make a healthy forest. We're working in our forest. We're cleaning up our forests, or else we can do like the Forest Service and do nothing and let them burn. So, I mean, it's just where we're going with this. And we signed, I thought it was a 15-year contract. Is it 10 and a 5?
It's from 2021 to 2031.
But we talked about a 5-year, but that did not give them the amount of money or the conditions so they could do, get a return on their investment, because they're constantly improving on their qualities and their standards to run as a basis. As Frank said, they're not running, they're moving the stuff internally rather than running it on chip trucks inside the mill, which is safer for their employers and safer for the air too. So there are so many factors to play into this, just about, we can save $3 here, but spend $6 to do it. So.
Well, Rex, I wasn't thinking about air quality as much as intuitively burning biomass that's local. Doesn't seem like there's a huge net increase in CO2. Like plants take it in, we burn it, we put the CO2 back out,
Yeah.
I don't know if the public understands how much. That seems like a better idea than shipping from a fracked oil well and Wyoming back over to here to burn.
And the outside fuel is coming, like if you think we're actually helping Mendocino County by taking that company's fuels, what they do is they've got what are called hard side trailers. And they roll them up, put lumber on them, and they haul lumber down and put them, get them down to Sassoon, haul rail. And on their way back, they will pick up a load of fuel to bring back. So they're not just hauling sailboat fuel, they're actually hauling something of value and then bringing it back to the mill and solving two problems in one. So they're not just burning one direction. They're running their trucks at about 80%, which is about as efficient as you can get or you can hope for.
If I can share one more piece of information that's on biomass, but not necessarily related to HSC, but could be, is we've been monitoring a CPUC proceeding that would bring CCAs like us, community choice aggregators, into the eligibility pool for biomat, which is a bioenergy market adjusting tariff. So this would allow CCAs to get cost recovery like investor-owned utilities are already able to do through procuring small biomass project. So it has to be projects that have a nameplate of 5 megawatts or less and are limited to 3 megawatts of output to the grid. But this is something we're following right now because it seems like a potential opportunity, because these, would presumably be, new build, new generation, probably gasification plants, so much lower emissions than what we see from TBD what kind of plants, but it would be something that would be lower emissions certainly than these old 80s and 90s vintage plants that Humboldt's been running over the last few decades. So this could be a win-win where we're able to continue using biomass at a cost that would be affordable for RCA's portfolio, and maybe getting past the emissions issues that are concerning to some stakeholders.
Well, I think that, Chair, I think most of that is for forest fire defense, because I just got back from Sacramento on a big forest fire and they have nowhere to go. There are piles in Tuolumne that are 600, 800 yards long, 100 foot in the air, and probably 50 yards wide, just piled up with dead trees and everything else, or trees they've taken around people's houses, and they don't know what to do with it. And they actually burn some of them during the winter. When it's raining, they'll light them up and burn them, which I can imagine what the emissions are on that. But we have nowhere to go with this timber. And we have a billion dead trees in our forest now. And that's increasing rapidly.
Yeah.
Great. So I think, thank you, Richard, for the report. Appreciate it. It's always good to get back into the biomass topic. So I read through the ad hoc committee's information that it received from the Air District. It looks to me like each of the three boilers emits somewhere on the order of 15 to 20 tons a year of particulate matter. So that's do the math times 3, 60 tons of PM 2.5.
3 truckloads.
And I can tell you that what that has potential to do is create toxic hotspots around these plants. I'm not saying that's happening here, but I'm saying it has the potential to. And that's a function, that's also a component of doing a carbon life cycle assessment overall for these plants and in figuring out the GHG emissions relative to other energy we might use. The Air District does have reference grade air quality monitors that they can deploy upon request. And I would just throw that out for consideration that any scientific approach to the data we could call on the Air District to provide that. Lastly, AB 617 is the Community Air Protection Program. They have, I'm not going to be able to quote the amount, but they have a lot of approved dollars for best available retrofit control technologies, BARCT. I don't know if Humboldt Sawmill Company is making themselves, is availing themselves of that pot of money. But as we think about these very old plants and the technologies that exist to reduce the emission profile, that's one program that was actually in legislation that was actually created to help solve that problem, to inject resources into this, into these plants to remove the localized emission profile from these plants. So that was just renewed and could be a source of beneficial funding for this. And then lastly, I'll say that in my day job, I have the great honor of working with tribal nations across the country. And I work with some of the tribal nations that are the fracking fields where we get our natural gas from. And so while there is a carbon, there's absolutely a full life cycle analysis of the carbon profile of these energy resources that we need to stay frosty on and keep refreshing. It's also true that by using the majority of natural gas that we use here for the places in this region that are connected to the electrical grid, that we're externalizing the in-community pollution that's happening elsewhere. So just keeping all of this in mind, I know it's always a lot to hold in mind at the same time as we try to solve these real problems, to your point, Director, about keeping all this in mind and making sure the lights turn on is important. But hopefully those are some action-oriented solutions that can help.
Anybody else from the board have comments or questions? Just a minute. Yeah, I was going to go out to the public. I was just going to do the portrait. Anybody? Okay, now I'm going to go out to the public.
I assume here's the best place.
Here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jana Valakovic, and it's a real pleasure to be with you all today. I'm the director of the University of California Cooperative Extension Department, which is a partnership with both Humboldt and Del Norte counties. So I'm synonymously the county's forester, and I've been in this role for a number of years. I just really wanted to come to you all. It's been a while since I've been before your board. There's some new faces, some new characters since I've last been here. And I just really wanted to share that I'm happy to be a resource to you all on some of these technical questions that you're working through. I am a member of the Biomass Technical Advisory Group. I was a member of the original one before the Community Advisory Group was formed. We've been working on these issues for a long time. I just want to say this is a really complicated subject. I really appreciate your report, Richard, and I think, you all have stayed the course in this, and it's really important. When you look at California, and I'll say what gives me this ability to talk in perspective is I sit on the Governor's Wildfire Forest Resilience Task Force. I hold 3 roles in that effort, including being on the Science Advisory Committee, as well as several other elements of trying to figure out how do we build resiliency within California. We're in an existential crisis when it comes to wildfire and to really trying to think about how we address the challenges of our time. If you're not aware, 1 out of every 8 acres in California has burned in the last 10 years. 1 out of every 8 acres. That number, when you think about it, that's been a lot of good fire, but there's been a lot of bad fire and there's been a lot of emissions. 43,000 structures have burned in that last 10 years. Within those 43,000 structures are some of the most toxic materials we will ever expose ourselves to. We are in a whole reset right now. We are converting forests to shrublands. We are converting shrublands to grasslands. And we have to figure out how to manage this fuel. So we're in a real challenge. But the perspective I'd like to bring is that much of California is extremely jealous about the infrastructure that we have in the North Coast. We still have viable sawmills. We still have trucking and transportation. We still have ways to dispose of the material we create. Most places are at square zero, starting over after they lost all of their infrastructure and are trying to figure out what to do with it. We're shipping in air curtain burners to dispose of dead trees. That's somewhat better than an open pile burn. We're fast tracking, trying to bring prescribed fire back into the landscape so that we can build some of that resiliency. That's substantially better than a wildfire burn. So we're in this complicated situation. And I know at times that it feels like you all serve somewhat of a burden in providing, some support for the infrastructure that we all need to manage and steward our landscapes. But it is such an important role. And it is providing a tremendous community benefit, provide the level of economic support that is many folds greater. We're at a place right now where we cannot bring in any more sawmill manufacturing, any more value-added processing, unless we have ways to dispose of the small amounts of material that come out the other end. Our economic capacity is limited based on the ability to move and dispose of certain elements. If we want to get to pace and scale and get to the place where we can really start to steward our landscapes, all of those systems have to work together. So it's complicated. And I just want to, applaud you all for sticking with it, for working through the hard stuff, creating space where we can have dynamic community conversations, hear each other, learn from each other, work through the issues that we're challenged by. And in the end of the day, hopefully we can feel good about the fact that, you've made the best decisions you can with the best available information, and we're trying hard to work through the space. But we disinvested nationwide in technologies and in wood innovation for the last 40 years. And it's kind of no wonder we're where we are after we stopped kind of the financial investment in innovation and development. So it's going to take us a while to sort of right size and adjust through, like, can we get to another form of manufacturing, another form of utilization, another byproduct, another way to get there? Well, we just didn't put the financial incentives to really drive the economic engines that come through, science and technology development. Most schools have closed that have worked in that space. We can't find people to work in our industry. So we're in a period of transition. And so I just want to applaud you all for sticking with it, working through the hard stuff. I come in and out of this topic. I'm really trying to think about the whole system and how we create viability and social sustainability and air quality health and all the things that make our community so great. We have so much to be proud of and so much to be fortunate with. In 2019, I wrote a set of things about biomass energy and kind of answered some questions. It's dated to 2019. It's got some things in there in terms of how much material we produce out of the sawmill side. It was written in truck and van loads. It's a little hard to do that now that we've got a different system in Scotia. But I'm happy to make that available if you want to wrestle through some of the questions, question what I said at that time, to take conversation offline at other places. I just want to thank you, and thank you, Director Marshall, for being willing to hang with us and work through it all. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Yana.
Pass these around if you want one.
Is there any questions for Yana? from the board? Not seeing any. Thank you. Anybody else from the public that would like to address the board on this?
Nobody online.
All right, and I'm not seeing anybody else here. I'll take it back up to the board. Any other questions for staff or comments? No, okay. So that was the information only. Thank you.
Very good.
Next up, we have Humboldt.
Can I ask just one sort of
Go ahead.
guidance thing? You know, Richard mentioned at the end, the thought of sort of maybe doing still an annual check-in, but having the sort of more robust, like, hey, let's get, you know, the committee involved and kind of do the deep dive every other year. I mean, I feel like we could become the Redwood Coast Biomass Discussion Authority if we wanted to spend as much time on this as we could. But, you know, the interest is sort of doesn't change that much on a year basis. Obviously, if something arises, we would, you know, bring it up. But, you know, to not necessarily just be in a constant state of biomass discussion, kind of doing that every other year, deep dive. Is that full? Just as sort of a guidance. I mean, we'd still check in with them every year, but
You're looking direction to staff. Is that-
yeah, just, you know.
Anybody want to weigh in?
I guess if there's no objections to that,
There you
then
go.
we'll
Because this is our purchase power. About violations and stuff, isn't it in the PPA itself?
So yeah, we have the option. There's a clause in the power purchase agreement that if they're out of compliance, that we have the option, the board has the option to terminate the contract. You know, now out of compliance is obviously, you know, there's a spectrum of that. It's like, did you go 52 miles an hour and, you know, safety corridor, or did you go 100 miles an hour down, you know, in front of a school? You know, those are different violations. And so I think part of where some of the questions that the CAC had was like, well, okay, you see a violation and it's like, well, what's the scale of that? And so working with just making the air district data, which is mentioned is available, kind of understandable.
And then the other question I had, is it true that if our CEA said for whatever reason, you know, maybe we decided that violation was one that we couldn't handle or something. And under the scenario that our CEA says, no, we don't want to buy the power from HSC anymore. Isn't it true, though, that HSC would just immediately turn around and be able to sell that power elsewhere because it fulfills the resource adequacy?
Yeah, so I would say the odds of them shutting the plant down if we cancel the contract are as close to zero as they could probably be. I mean, since the one, you know, you saw the pie chart of how much they use on site. And so using their own fuel on site instead of having to buy that from the grid, you know, it's a significant cost savings. What wasn't shown on that is also that they use the waste heat from the plant for their kilns and stuff. So they're like, they'd have to buy natural gas for the kilns, they'd have to buy the electricity. And so I think even if they were giving away the power, they probably would continue to operate. So they would also have to truck it and get it to another, you know, they'd have to do something with the material. And so I think their incentive is to continue running, you know, even if they weren't getting a good price, then add on to that right now, you know, the value from the output that we're buying is very much in the money as far as the capacity is very valuable. The energy is now very valuable. You know, yesterday evening, there was like, you know, $300 to $600 a megawatt hour energy prices, forget, you know, any of the other attributes. And so I think, they would not have a hard time finding people to buy we weren't buying them. And so that's different than when we first launched and it was not in the money and we were also paying a higher price. So the fact that the prices come down for us, and then also the value of what they produce is much greater than it was, you know, 6 years ago.
Thanks. That's what I thought.
And, the report, our risk management report didn't, maybe that's not the right one that gave the report, but so this 69% of their biomass was going out to the grid. And
yeah,
they're only using the remaining part for internal, so they would still have to get rid of 69%. They would have to find some way to get rid of it. And what you just said, I mean, even if they sold it at a low rate, they wouldn't, it would go back into the grid. It wouldn't continue to create transportation costs.
Yeah, so I think, you know, if RCA went away or our contract went away, they would have to do something with that other percentage that we're currently buying, but it would still go into the grid and, you know, it would,
Somebody else would buy it.
someone else would buy it because
Exactly. Somebody else is.
Well,
And the other question was, is different, you know, we had a public comment letter, we've had different ones. How much are they in violation? When you like violation wise, you mentioned that it's not apples for apples where you're going the speed limit. But how much are they actually in violation of the air quality? Rex mentioned if they were, and that would be my understanding, if they were greatly in out of compliance, they would shut them down. They would or fine them to the point of they get kind of nasty. Fun.
yeah, I mean, we're not the air quality regulator, you know, and I think, you know, we can provide information and say, hey, here's what, you know, the air district's reporting and here's what they're reporting to the air district and put that in context just so that, you know, you all are making informed decisions because maybe the point where they get shut down is, you know, farther out of compliance than the RCA board feels comfortable with, you know, and so, you know, it's not like the first time you get a single violation, you get shut down. And so we can, you know, provide that in a more sort of digestible fashion kind of going forward. And that was one of the comments people asked, you know, because they see a report of like, here's all the violations. Like, was that bad or is that, you know, not so bad? You know, how bad is that? You know,
Oh, Rex, go ahead.
Jason Davis is a compliance officer, and in his letter, he doesn't say anything that they're egregious. And then the other thing is, Richard mentioned the two power plants that are closed down. Both Fairhaven and Blue Lake were set up on their purchase agreements. I think they had NESRAC agreement, which was great when natural gas was $11, but at $2.50, they couldn't make it and they didn't have the money to afford to do their maintenance. And that's basically what brought them down. Blue Lake's inefficient. It's only a 10. So, but I truly believe that, you know, it's beneficial, you know, for them. I mean, to say, oh, we just can break the contract, they'll still keep going, everything will be fine, is so far out of statement to say in a public setting when you don't know that for sure. We don't know their complete business operation.
and so just to maybe reframe why I'm saying that, because I think there's a perception in the public, or at least some members of the public, that RCEA is the decider of like, oh, we're subsidizing biomass. And if we stop subsidizing biomass, they'll stop operating the plant. And I just don't think that's true because it's like, it's a valuable output. And so I think they would be very capable of finding somebody else to enter into a contract if it was the similar terms that we have. And so I'm not saying that, oh, it's no big deal if we break it or not. It'd actually be bad for us because it would cost us more money to replace that contract with some other resource. I just think, you know, I get told very often by members of the public of like, oh, well, if you guys stop subsidizing biomass and we're buying it, but we're not subsidizing it anymore. And so I think it's not true to say RCA somehow is the decider of whether that plant is operating or not.
Jenna?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why the conversation about the other biomass plants, as everyone may know, the Blue Lake Rancheria tribe is about a half a mile away from the former Blue Lake Power or whatever other names there are, that plant. And I can say that they don't use terminology like egregious in the notice of violation or notice of exceedance letters. So I think the advisory group, the biomass technical advisory group, asked for more detail from the air district. Is that right? Around that? Yeah. And around what that means, like parsing it for them. So data is great. More data is even better. And I think it's a really complicated subject. And also that I think Dr. Fingerman also asked the question about understanding where the feedstocks are coming from. That I assume is about the ability to get a more finer grained carbon life cycle analysis around the profile. And again, you know, this is one in many sources of energy that we have. But for me, with real direct experience with the particulate matter pollution issue and a toxic hotspot that it creates, it's serious. And so I don't want to get too sidetracked from that. And I think that the recommendations of the Biomass Technical Advisory Committee are great. And I want to support them in their work. And I think it's important. Thanks.
Thank you. And since I'm chair, I can do stuff like this. Kind of signaling that you wanted to say something, and I'm just going to go ahead and let you.
Yeah, I'll just say it's an interesting, like Matthew's point about whether or not they could sell the power is interesting because the landscape of how these contracts came about, right? They came about in the 70s during the renewable energy crisis. And it was during the time period we were also trying to figure out how to get rid of TP burners, right? You know, TP burners were a thing, right? And so all these biomass power throughout California, and do you remember the number? I think it was like 57 of them at one time, had contracts with various different utilities. And those contracts had certain time periods. What happened to us in the North Coast is that our contracts expired a little earlier, and there wasn't a mechanism from a policy perspective to try and really encourage PG&E to stay in those contracts. We fell out earlier or didn't end up in the right negotiating position. After you all got into an arrangement with Scotia, there was an assembly bill that passed that actually mandated that PG&E renew the contracts they had currently for those that were coming in later. So we got out of cycle and all of that. It wouldn't apply retroactively to us because you're not, you know, because our power plants aren't in conversation with PG&E. But, you know, the landscape of energy has changed dynamically in the last 3 years, and it's going to keep changing that way the more we switch to, you know, wanting to plug in our cars at night and, you know, do different things, right? So I think it's a little hard to anticipate exactly what would happen. We know we need baseload power. We know we need storage. We know we need all these things, but whether or not they would sustain in the same way that provides value to the rest of the other industry and doesn't just support their business, that's where it gets more complex.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close that one. That was 7.2. It's 5:13. We've got 7.3 Humboldt Electric Future Community Outreach Final Report.
Okay, you get to listen to me for a few more minutes here. Maybe a somewhat less contentious topic this time, so we might get through it a little faster. So I'm going to kind of wrap up this months-long project that we've been doing that we called Humboldt's Electric Future. And I talked to you about this back in the spring, first getting it up and running. Having a little trouble with the clicker here. So I'm going to just kind of recap the process that we used on this. And then I'm going to talk about the public workshop activities and outcomes from this. Just talk about our final report and next steps. So the process started with planning something, and what this came out of, just to remind you, we're required by the state to submit an integrated resource plan every other year in the even numbered years. And the reporting process is pretty arcane. It involves some massive spreadsheets that are hard to make sense out of for a layperson, and a narrative report that isn't much easier than that to understand. So we wanted to get people involved in thinking about our long-term energy planning, our power procurement planning, but kind of do it in a little bit more user-friendly environment. So we decided to do this process, those alternating odd-numbered years in between these. So we did some initial public engagement in the form of putting out an initial report, setting up a website, setting up an email address where people could reach us with questions and comments about this. And then we engaged with our friends at the Energy Authority to do some portfolio development with some different kind of hypothetical portfolios that people could compare and do some analysis on those, so that there were some numbers to look at. And then we held public workshops, took people's input and used that to inform the final report. And also I'll mention that we brought the final report to the Community Advisory Committee earlier this month before bringing it to you. So the version of the report that's getting published incorporates some feedback from the CAC. So the workshops, we did one each, an in-person workshop in this very room here and a webinar a few days apart. For each of those, we had a presentation and some interactive activities where people could provide input. We had discussion groups. We had some exercises in resource allocation and ranking different power portfolios. And I'll talk about that in just a little more detail here. The discussion questions we put out to people, and they were a little more detailed in the form that we gave them to the participants, was what's the best way we can spend our available funds to make the biggest impact? How much do you value local Humboldt County generation compared to some of the other goals that we have? And what are the key challenges to providing equitable, affordable energy while still hitting our local renewable energy goals? Some things that came out of those discussion questions, people wanted to see more local development and programs to incentivize job creation, community resilience. Reducing emissions quickly was really the most important thing to people in general. We had concerns we heard about being able to scale up what we're doing so far, making sure it's affordable, making sure it's carbon neutral, and people wanted RCA to do more on education and outreach. So we did a resource allocation activity. The in-person workshop did this with sticky dots, as you can see in the photo there. We gave everybody 10 little sticker tokens and asked them to allocate those among building local renewable energy projects, giving everybody lower electricity rates, focusing rate reduction on low-income customers, increasing our customer energy programs, or building our financial reserves. We did spend some time talking about the value of financial reserves as sort of a rate stabilization and kind of rainy day fund for RCEA to help people understand why they might value that alongside some of these other things. So we provided some context for all of these. Here were outcomes. So the orange bars are from the webinar and the blue bars for the in-person workshop. Pretty similar breakdown by percentage. In both cases, the local renewable development got by a pretty long shot the most tokens out of those, with the others coming in pretty similar in importance to people. In terms of a preferred energy portfolio, we explained that out towards the out years of our integrated resource plan time horizon, which is about a decade, we expect to have about 40% of our energy needs met through resources that we've already committed to through contracts that we're in today. So that leaves 60% of our portfolio that's kind of up for grabs, that the public can give us valuable input on what to do there. And that 40% is overwhelmingly solar, with that one large solar contract that Jacqueline talked to you about earlier in her presentation. So we assembled 5 different sample portfolios to fill that 60% of unallocated capacity. And so one of them was maximizing local resources. Another one was, basically putting all our unallocated load into offshore wind. Another being maximizing diversity. So you've kind of got the most different slices of the pie there. Another one that was kind of the quickest pathway to renewable energy, which in part meant keeping some bioenergy in our portfolio since we already have an existing resource for that. And you'll see that some of these say generic onshore wind. So that assumes that either locally or non-locally that we could procure onshore wind resources. And then the last one was just what's the way we can most reduce greenhouse gases and do it affordably. So that meant keeping some large hydropower in our portfolio, which is present in the other instances. And then with analytic help from the Energy Authority, we came up with these net yearly revenues associated with each of these. So you can see if you go from left to right, these become more and more favorable to RCEA financially. And so what these millions of dollars mean in a year, how much better off we would be financially at the end of the year compared to kind of a baseline portfolio where we're just procuring kind of generic resources at market price while meeting our minimum compliance needs for renewables, et cetera. Again, this is broken down between the in-person workshop on the left and the webinar one on the right. Fairly similar outcomes here. In both cases, reducing GHG by any means necessary and keeping some hydropower to do that affordably was the most popular response or most popular portfolio option. The ones that got the fewest votes were the maximizing offshore wind. So apparently people didn't want us to put all our eggs in that basket, and maximizing local energy got somewhat of a low score, which is interesting because if you think back to the allocation activity, people really did, compared to other things we could spend money on, they really did want to see local renewable resources maximized. But maybe when that's put up in comparison against goals like reducing our overall GHG emissions, people rethink that a bit. We, in our final report, provided these profiles that show over the course of a day with these different portfolios. And this is just one example here. This is that reducing emissions portfolio, the one that has some local hydro, or not local, but some large hydropower in it. This shows what our load, the wavy black line, looks like against the resources that we would have in our portfolio. And you can see what happens, especially in summer, is that we wind up with a big excess of electricity above our load in the middle of the day when the solar is cranking, and we wind up with gaps in the morning and evening, late night hours when we need to be meeting our load through other resources that would not be part of that long-term portfolio. So that might mean having to procure a lot of energy storage would probably be the most likely solution to that. So just a reminder that each of these portfolios has implications for how well the supply matches our load. So we got feedback from the Community Advisory Committee on this. In the study, in the report, in the draft report, we talked about studying what it would take to get to a portfolio that's truly renewable around the clock at all hours. Some committee members thought it was important to not only study that, but to commit to that as a goal. We also got suggestions to give more consideration to replacing biomass with other renewables. People would like to see analysis and discussion of the emissions for each portfolio. We didn't look into that in detail in the study. They wanted to know more about how expected electrification is incorporated in our load forecast. The short answer to that is we used state forecasts that do make assumptions about electrification through more electric vehicles and more home electrification. So that is accounted for, but debatable whether you accept the assumptions on that. And then people just wanted us to improve readability, add more definition of terms to just make it a yet more user-friendly report. So we did our best to address all of those comments in the final version that's being published. And so as far as next steps, we've already taken this to the CAC as mentioned. You've got it in front of you today. We plan to publish the report following this meeting. And in a year from now, we'll be taking all of this and incorporating it into our next integrated resource plan. So I'm really excited that we got some good, robust participation. One other thing I'll mention, and this is discussed in the final report, is that we recognize that the people that turn out for these workshops are a self-selected group that aren't necessarily representative of our ratepayers as a whole. And we want to improve our process and getting more representative input. And we've gotten some interesting ideas put forth on how to do that, including talking with some folks at Cal Poly Humboldt who have used this process called Citizens Assembly, That's a little bit like a grand jury type process where you really go out and recruit in the community to get a group that's demographically similar to the community as a whole. And you provide stipends so that a diverse range of people are able to participate. And you, in return, expect a serious time commitment out of them to have some in-depth discussions. But this kind of process has worked really well in some other key community decision-making process. So we're so what's that you know could fit our budget bandwidth for doing this next time around, and hopefully get a real representative sampling of community opinion.
How big was the pool on this event? I mean, how many people?
In total, between the two seminars, we had about 50 people, pretty evenly split between the in-person and the online one.
Thank you.
That's it for that item.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Questions for Richard or staff?
Not a question, but thank you. And it looked great and it was interesting to read through, and I'm sure the public will enjoy it as well.
Next time.
Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you. So, yeah, really great work. And Citizens Assembly methodology sounds really promising. Just want to thank you for reaching out and looking for ways to improve equity in the participatory realm in these things. So I've had a lot of questions about this from the circles from tribal nations and other circles that I'm in. When we think about electrification across the region, so the increased load paired with or minus, hopefully, the new ability we'll have to maybe increase energy efficiency through rural REN and other amazing things that our CEA is doing. Is there analysis around what that net increase or balance, what the net balance might be over the next few years? And was it in there in a graph and I just missed it?
Not a robust analysis like I'm sure you have in mind. You know, like I say, in the integrated resource plan, we're actually required to use the hyper forecast, which is what the California Energy Commission provides. And I think that the intent behind that is that the California Public Utilities Commission is kind of aggregating all of the IRPs from the different load serving entities. So they want kind of apples to apples, you know, inputs being used. So they don't want everybody to just kind of say, well, this is what we think our load's going to be. And their methodology isn't consistent with the other load serving entities. But I think you're right that for this Humboldt's electric future, it would be really interesting if we had a more kind of robust and locally informed look at how things that we're driving might actually our load in the future. And I think that's
I just get that question
have to have across the different departments.
I get that question a lot. So I just bring it up here as without any pressure to necessarily answer it. And then the other thing that was interesting about the scenarios, the mixed scenarios for the 60%, was the revenue that each would generate for RCEA. I'm wondering if there's analysis around what the indirect regional revenue is or indirect economic benefit is of each of those scenarios, because it's not, part of the local, the prioritizing local generation is this idea that those dollars are going to be circulating more in the local community in the region versus being extracted out. So I just bring that up again, not as necessarily a suggestion, but I'm wondering if there was a easy way to maybe just take a pass at what that calculation would be. I've done this with the Blue Lake Rancheria tribes, energy systems. generally the multiplier is 1.2 for energy-based sector builds. But I was just curious. The data is terrific, and then if we kind of zoom out to the purpose of it all, it might be interesting to see that economic benefit too.
Anybody else from the board? I didn't take it out to the public yet, did I? Okay, this is the time we're at item 7.3, the electric feature community outreach final report.
No comment.
No comment out there, nothing in here. So this is just accepting the final report. Thank you, staff. And I did go to the outreach things and it was good. It was a lot of work. So thank you, guys. Good. All right, next up, staff report, 9.1, executive director's report.
Just real quickly, how the events are starting to be a thing again. We're starting to do, more of them. We used to go to like tons of events and we're ramping back up. So we're going to be at the Salmon Festival up in Klamath, Wildwood Days in Rio Dell. And, maybe not so much for this year because it's already kind of into public event season. But if anyone has, local community events that you think would be important or, valuable for us to have a booth at or whatever, then just, let us know.
All right. Questions, comments on that?
Are these talking about institutional booths?
Yes. Take out to the public. This is 9.1, executive director's report.
No comments.
No comments. On to future agenda items and any requests that any requests that requires board action be set by the board for future agenda or referred to staff. Anything that came up? Go ahead, Frank.
I'm not sure how to word this or how to, because it's a big subject too, but it's an understanding of the grid that we're involved with. We hear a lot of things depending what news you're listening to, but telling you don't plug your electric cars in from on peak time. We see stuff with the temperature and the heat that we're having and how that's affecting it. And then how does that grid component affect Humboldt County? We get our power primarily from the Humboldt Bay and the grid comes across over 36 and then a little bit of local. But the goal is at some point to get to this renewable energy is going to be 100% by 2045.
2045, yeah.
2030.
But there's a big component supposed to hit 2025. And it's defining that we're within Humboldt County. So how that grid component, I don't say we have to have it immediately presentation, but I don't say dumb it down, but bring it down to where it's a practical level of how we're affected on this grid throughout the state. When we hear warnings, how we apply that to our local grid and also to our CEA.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, well, I think that does it. And I'm going to adjourn it. It's 5:34. Thanks, everybody.
No.